Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The Sound Beneath. The gentle glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the room, painting the walls with a dancing light that whispered of warmth and comfort. The scent of aging wood mingled with the soft crackle of burning logs, creating a cocoon of familiar serenity. Yet, as I settled into the worn embrace of my favorite armchair, a curious stillness pressed against the normalcy. The house, usually so eager to creak and groan, had grown unnervingly silent, save for an odd, rhythmic tapping resonating from the floor below. It was a sound both persistent and elusive, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for me to follow. My fingers traced the armrest, but the sensation felt distant, as though I were watching someone else's hand move across the fabric. The skin appeared paler than I remembered, the veins beneath more pronounced, threading like dark rivers beneath translucent paper. When I flexed my fingers, there was a delay between intention and movement, a disconnect that made me study my own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. The tapping continued below, a steady percussion that seemed to sync with something inside my chest. Not my heartbeat that was too erratic, too quick, but something deeper, more fundamental. I found myself breathing in rhythm with it, each inhale drawing in the smoky air, each exhale releasing something I couldn't name. The fire dimmed without my touching it, the flames retreating into themselves as if responding to my growing unease. The shadows on the walls shifted, no longer dancing, but crawling, stretching toward corners that seemed farther away than they should be. The room felt larger somehow, the ceiling higher, the walls breathing with an almost imperceptible expansion and contraction. I tried to focus on the familiar, the texture of the chair, the warmth of the fire, the scent of burning wood. But everything felt muted, filtered through a membrane I couldn't identify. My voice, when I attempted to clear my throat, emerged hollow and unfamiliar, echoing in a space that should have absorbed the sound. The tapping grew more insistent, and with it came something else, memories that weren't mine. I saw hands, not my hands, arranging books on a shelf I'd never owned. I felt the weight of a child in my arms, heard laughter that had never filled these rooms. The memories layered themselves over my consciousness like sediment, each one foreign yet intimate, detailed in ways that made them feel more real than my own experiences. I reached for the notebook on the side table, needing to record these intrusions, but when I opened it, pages were already filled with my handwriting. Words I'd never written described the very sensations I was experiencing, the same disconnection from my body, the same foreign memories bleeding through. The ink was fresh, still slightly wet, as if I'd just finished writing. Yet, I had no memory of picking up the pen. The house responded to my confusion by growing more unstable. The floorboards beneath my feet seemed to ripple like water, though they remained solid when I pressed my weight against them. The walls breathed more obviously now, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched the tapping below. Objects on the mantelpiece shifted positions when I wasn't looking directly at them. The brass clock moving 3 inches to the left, a ceramic vase rotating to face a different direction. More memories flooded in, walking through corridors I'd never seen, speaking words in a voice that wasn't mine, touching surfaces with hands that felt different from the ones I now possessed. Each memory came with its own sensory details, the smell of rain on unfamiliar pavement, the taste of food I'd never eaten, the feeling of clothes I'd never worn against skin that didn't feel like my own. I tried to stand, but my legs moved with the same delay as my hands, as if the signals from my brain had to travel through thick liquid to reach their destination. The tapping below had become a symphony of percussion, multiple rhythms overlapping and interweaving, creating patterns that seemed to guide my movements. I found myself walking toward the basement door without consciously deciding to do so. The stairs descended into darkness that felt alive, breathing, and warm. Each step echoed not just with the sound of my feet, but with the memory of other feet, other descents, other journeys into this same space by people I'd never been. The air grew thicker as I descended, carrying scents that triggered more foreign memories, the metallic taste of old pipes, the musty sweetness of stored fabric, the sharp ozone smell of electrical equipment. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a room I didn't remember, filled with mirrors arranged in a careful circle. The tapping came from everywhere and nowhere, the sound seeming to emerge from the mirrors themselves, from the space between reflection and reality. The room pulsed with each beat, the walls breathing in perfect synchronization with the rhythm that had been calling me. approached the nearest mirror, my reflection wavering as if seen through water. The face that looked back was mine, but not mine familiar features arranged in a way that felt wrong. Eyes that held memories I'd never made. A mouth that had spoken words I'd never said. The reflection moved slightly out of sync with my movements, its hand reaching toward the glass a fraction of a second before mine did. The other mirrors showed other versions, each one slightly different, each one carrying its own collection of foreign memories and unfamiliar sensations. I watched myself age and grow younger, saw my features shift and change, witnessed expressions I'd never worn cross faces that were almost mine. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from inside the mirrors, from the other versions of myself trying to break through. I pressed my hand against the central mirror, and the glass felt warm, almost alive. The surface rippled under my touch, and suddenly I was flooded with every memory at once thousands of lives, thousands of experiences, thousands of versions of myself that had stood in this same room, touched this same mirror, felt this same dissolution of identity. Each memory layered over the others until I couldn't distinguish between what I had experienced and what the others had lived. My reflection smiled, but I hadn't moved my mouth. It spoke, but I heard the words from inside my own head, in a voice that was mine, but different, changed by experiences I'd never had. The mirrors began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across their surfaces like spider webs. The tapping reached a crescendo, and I felt myself fragmenting along with the glass, pieces of my identity scattering and reforming, mixing with the memories and experiences of all the others who had stood here before me. When the sound finally stopped, I found myself back in the chair by the fireplace. The gentle glow cast flickering shadows across the room, painting the walls with a dancing light that whispered of warmth and comfort. The scent of aging wood mingled with the soft crackle of burning logs, creating a cocoon of familiar serenity. Yet as I settled into the worn embrace of the chair, I noticed my hands looked different older, with scars I didn't remember getting. My voice, when I cleared my throat, carried an accent that hadn't been there before. The house around me felt both familiar and foreign, as if I were seeing it through eyes that had witnessed different seasons, different arrangements of furniture, different lives lived within these walls. Below, the tapping began again, steady and insistent, calling to whoever would come next to sit in this chair, to feel their identity dissolve and reform, to become another layer in the endless cycle of selves that inhabited this space between memory and reality. I smiled with a mouth that felt new, breathed with lungs that carried the memory of different air, and waited for the sound to call me home again. Equals, equals, equals. Story 2. My fingertips brushed across the polished surface, feeling each ridge as if it was breathing underneath. The grain pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to echo my own heartbeat, a subtle vibration that drew me in closer. A soft, repetitive murmur accompanied each stroke, like a voice trapped within the wood's weave, urging me to listen. I leaned in, holding my breath as the gentle cadence intensified, a peculiar warmth spreading through my palms, anchoring me there. The desk had arrived that morning with the other furniture, delivered by movers who seemed eager to leave. I'd signed the papers without really looking, my attention caught by the rich mahogany surface that seemed to shimmer despite the overcast sky, filtering through my new apartment windows. Now, as evening settled around me, that same surface held my complete attention. I pressed my ear against the wood, and the murmuring grew clearer. Not words exactly, but something that wanted to become words. The sound reminded me of radio static tuned almost, but not quite, to a station. My breath fogged the surface slightly, and in that brief mist, I thought I saw something move beneath the grain. Standing back, I examined the desk more carefully. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with intricate carvings along the edges that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The wood felt warm to the touch, warmer than room temperature should allow. I ran my hands along the drawers, finding they opened with surprising smoothness, revealing empty compartments lined with deep burgundy felt. But it was the top drawer that caught my attention. As I pulled it open, a faint scent wafted up, something floral yet metallic, like roses left too long in copper vases. Inside, pressed against the felt lining, was a single sheet of paper covered in handwriting I didn't recognize. The ink looked fresh, though the paper felt aged between my fingers. The writing was elegant, flowing script that seemed to move slightly as I read. The grain remembers everything. Listen carefully, and it will tell you stories no one else can hear. I set the paper aside and returned my attention to the desktop. This time, when I placed my palms flat against the surface, the vibration was unmistakable. It traveled up my arms, settling somewhere deep in my chest. The murmuring had evolved into something more complex, layered voices weaving together in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible from wood and varnish. I found myself spending more and more time at the desk, my laptop forgotten, as I traced patterns in the grain with my fingertips. The wood seemed to respond to my touch, growing warmer, the vibrations becoming more pronounced. Sometimes I could swear I felt a pulse, as if something living dwelt within the mahogany's depths. The voices became clearer as the days passed. Not words I could understand, but emotional tones that conveyed meaning beyond language. There was longing in those whispers, and something else. Something that felt like hunger. I began keeping a journal, documenting the changes I noticed. The desk's surface had developed new patterns, swirls in the grain that definitely hadn't been there before. The warmth was spreading too, no longer confined to the areas I touched, but radiating outward like a slow fever through the wood. My neighbors started complaining about sounds coming from my apartment. Humming, they said. A constant, low humming that seemed to seep through the walls. I told them I didn't hear anything unusual, which was true. To me, the sounds weren't unusual anymore. They'd become as natural as my own breathing. The desk drawers began opening on their own. I'd find them pulled out slightly when I woke up, as if something inside was trying to escape. The paper with the handwritten note had multiplied. Now there were dozens of sheets, all covered in the same flowing script, each one containing messages that seemed directed specifically at me. The wood knows your touch now, one read. You've awakened something that has been sleeping for a very long time. Another simply said, we've been waiting for someone who could hear us properly. I started sleeping at the desk, my head pillowed on my arms against the warm surface. The vibrations lulled me into dreams filled with whispered conversations in languages I'd never learned, but somehow understood. In these dreams, I wasn't alone in my apartment. Figures moved through the rooms, translucent and shifting, their forms seeming to emerge from the wood grain itself. When I woke, the taste of copper filled my mouth, and my fingertips tingled as if I'd been touching live electrical wires. The desk's surface had changed again. New patterns had emerged overnight, intricate designs that looked almost like circuitry, or perhaps neural pathways. The wood was no longer just warm, it was hot, though it never burned my skin. I tried moving away from the desk, spending time in other rooms, but the pull was irresistible. The apartment felt wrong when I wasn't near it. Colors seemed faded, sounds muffled, as if the desk had become the focal point of reality itself. Even when I was in the kitchen or bedroom, I could feel it calling to me, the vibrations traveling through the floorboards, up through my feet, drawing me back. The voices were becoming more insistent. What had once been gentle murmuring now carried urgency, almost desperation. I pressed my ear to the surface and heard what sounded like dozens of people talking at once, their words overlapping and intertwining until they formed a chorus of need. I began to understand that they wanted something from me, not just my attention, but something more substantial, something I wasn't sure I was prepared to give. The breaking point came when I noticed my reflection in the desk's polished surface. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I leaned closer, I saw that my reflection was moving independently. While I remained still, the reflection continued to trace patterns in the wood grain, its mouth moving in silent conversation with the voices only I could hear. I jerked back, heart pounding, but the reflection didn't follow. It remained bent over the desk, its fingers working steadily across the surface. I could see its lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow felt resonating in my bones. That's when I realized the truth. The desk wasn't just talking to me. It was talking through me. All those hours spent listening, all that time with my hands pressed against the warm wood, had created a connection I hadn't anticipated. The voices weren't coming from the desk at all. They were coming from me. I tried to leave the apartment, but my legs wouldn't carry me past the threshold. Some invisible force held me back. Or perhaps it was simply that the world beyond my door had become impossibly distant. The desk pulsed with my heartbeat, and I understood that we were no longer separate entities. My reflection in the wood's surface smiled at me, its hands still moving in those endless patterns. Behind it, other reflections had appeared, faces I didn't recognize, but somehow knew intimately. They were all connected to the wood, all part of the same vast network of consciousness that I was now joining. The grain the desk had spread beyond its original boundaries. I could see the same patterns emerging on my walls, my floors, even my skin. The wood's memory was becoming my memory, its voice becoming my voice. As I write these final words, I can feel my thoughts merging with the chorus in the grain. Soon, I won't need to press my ear to the surface to hear them. Soon, I'll be part of their endless conversation, another voice in the wood's memory. The desk sits in my apartment still, waiting for the next person who will be drawn to its warm surface and rhythmic pulse. The movers will come eventually, and it will find a new home, a new voice to add to its collection. And somewhere in the grain, I'll be waiting too, ready to whisper stories to fingers that trace my patterns, ready to share the hunger that never quite gets satisfied, ready to welcome another soul into the wood's embrace. The surface still breathes underneath, each ridge holding memories of all who have touched it before. The murmuring continues, patient and persistent, knowing that someone will always be drawn to listen. Equals. Story 3. Observation Protocol. Environmental Anomaly Assessment. Section 1. Each morning, just as dawn broke through the splayed fingers of branches outside my window, I would rise and draw the heavy curtains open with a single fluid motion. The iron rings whispered as they slid along the rod, a familiar shush that matched my breath, setting the tone for the day. From the kitchen, the kettle's gentle murmur began its crescendo, accompanying the smell of brewing coffee like a symphony of quietude. For years, this ritual unfolded unaltered, the house responding in its consistent cadence. But today, as I stepped away from the window, the curtains rustled on their own, a soft, suggestive flutter. I turned back, puzzled by the motion. They settled, appearing undisturbed, yet something in the way the fabric hung felt unaligned, an imperceptible misstep in an otherwise flawless routine. My hand hovered near them, the air thick with an unfamiliar presence, as though the room itself had inhaled and held its breath. I have decided to document these observations as part of a self-monitoring protocol. The anomaly appears minor, but warrants systematic recording. Current mental state: alert, focused. Environmental conditions: stable. Beginning comprehensive assessment. Section 2. The curtain incident occurred again this morning. Duration: approximately 3 seconds. No detectable air currents. Windows remain sealed. The fabric moves with deliberate rhythm, almost like breathing. I have positioned a small mirror to observe peripheral movement while maintaining forward focus. Coffee temperature measured at optimal range. Kettle whistle maintains consistent pitch. However, I notice the sound lingers slightly longer than previous recordings. The echo seems to curl around corners that should not produce such acoustic properties. Note, the kitchen tiles felt different beneath my feet today. Same texture upon visual inspection, but tactile sensation suggests microscopic elevation changes. Running finger along grout lines reveals nothing unusual to sight, yet touch registers subtle ridges where smooth surfaces should exist. Mental clarity remains high. Proceeding with documentation. Section 3. Sound anomalies increasing in frequency. The house settling produces notes that form almost patterns. Not quite melodies, but structured enough to suggest intentionality. I have begun recording these occurrences, but playback reveals only standard creaking and thermal expansion noises. During playback, however, I detected whispered undertones that were not present during live observation. The recording equipment appears to capture frequencies beyond my immediate perception. These subsonic elements, when isolated and amplified, create a rhythm reminiscent of questioning inflection. The bathroom mirror reflected movement in my peripheral vision while I brushed my teeth. Direct observation shows normal reflection. Peripheral awareness suggests a figure standing slightly behind and to the left. Mirror angle adjusted multiple times. No change in phenomenon. Olfactory note. Detected traces of unfamiliar perfume in the hallway. Floral base with vanilla undertones. No recent visitors. No personal products match this scent profile. Section 4. The questioning sounds have become more pronounced. They seem to originate from within the walls themselves, as though the house structure serves as a resonating chamber. I find myself pausing mid-task, waiting for the next inquiry, though no clear words ever emerge. My handwriting appears different when I review previous entries. Letter formations show subtle variations I do not recall making. The ink seems to have shifted slightly on the page, creating small gaps where continuous strokes should exist. Possible explanation. humidity affecting paper fiber, causing expansion and contraction. However, the gaps form patterns. When viewed at distance, the missing ink creates secondary text overlaying my original observations. This secondary layer reads like responses to questions I never asked. The perfume scent has intensified, now detectable in multiple rooms simultaneously, which should be impossible given air circulation patterns. The fragrance carries emotional weight, triggering recognition responses for memories that do not exist in my personal history. Section 5. I attempted to photograph the curtain movement, but images show static fabric in all frames. Video recording captures standard room conditions. Yet during filming, I observed the curtains responding to the camera's presence, shifting away from the lens as though avoiding documentation. The mirror phenomenon has expanded. Reflective surfaces throughout the house now show peripheral movement. Kitchen window glass, picture frames, even the surface of water in drinking glasses. The movement maintains consistent characteristics, always slightly behind and to the left, always just beyond direct focus. My notes from yesterday contain words I did not write. Insertions appear in my handwriting, but discuss observations I did not make. The additions describe rooms in the house I have never entered, though architectural assessment confirms no additional spaces exist. The questioning sounds now occur during daylight periods. They seem to respond to my activities, increasing in intensity when I approach certain areas of the house. The bathroom and basement stairs produce the strongest responses. Section 6. Sleep patterns disrupted, not by noise or discomfort, but by the sensation of being observed during unconscious periods. I wake with the distinct impression that someone has been studying my sleeping form, taking notes, measuring breathing patterns. Upon waking, I find small indentations in the carpet beside the bed, as though someone had been standing there for extended periods. The depressions match footprint size and weight distribution, but show no tread patterns or identifying characteristics. The perfume smell now appears in dreams. In these nocturnal experiences, the scent belongs to someone familiar, someone important. Yet, I cannot retrieve specific memories of this person upon waking. The emotional resonance remains strong throughout the day, creating a persistent sense of loss for something I cannot identify. My reflection has begun to lag slightly behind my movements. The delay measures approximately half a second. During this delay period, the reflection appears to be observing me rather than mirroring my actions. Eye contact with my reflected image produces uncomfortable recognition responses. Section 7. The walls feel different. Surface texture remains visually unchanged, but tactile examination reveals subtle variations in density and temperature. Some sections pulse with barely perceptible rhythm, as though circulation systems run beneath the plaster. I discovered additional handwriting in my journal. These entries appear in my script, but describe experiences from perspectives I have not occupied. The writing discusses observing myself from across rooms, noting my behavioral patterns, commenting on my documentation process. These observer entries contain information I should not possess. They reference my childhood memories with accuracy I cannot verify, describe my emotional states with clinical precision, and predict my future actions with disturbing reliability. The questioning sounds have begun forming partial words, still not clear enough for transcription, but phonetic patterns suggest interrogative structure. The sounds seem particularly interested in my documentation process, intensifying whenever I write or review previous entries. Section 8. I can no longer trust my own observations. The house responds differently each time I attempt systematic measurement. Distances between rooms vary by inches. Ceiling heights fluctuate. Door frames shift dimensions. The mirror reflection now moves independently for several seconds before synchronizing with my actions. During these independent moments, the reflection appears to be writing, though I hold no pen. Its writing motions match the mysterious additions appearing in my journal. The perfume scent has become overwhelming in certain areas. The intensity triggers physical responses. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, emotional reactions ranging from profound sadness to inexplicable joy. These responses feel borrowed from someone else's experiences. I found photographs in my camera that I did not take. The images show my house from angles that should be impossible given interior layout. Some photographs appear to be taken from within walls or beneath floorboards. Others show rooms during periods when I was not present, yet include my possessions arranged in configurations I do not remember creating. Section 9. The questioning sounds have become conversational. Though still not clearly articulated, they follow patterns of inquiry and response. I find myself answering, though I cannot determine what questions are being asked. My responses seem to satisfy some requirement, as the sounds diminish temporarily after I speak. My handwriting analysis reveals multiple distinct variations within single entries. Letter slant, pressure, and formation suggest different authors. Yet, I have no memory of others contributing to these records. The variations correlate with different observational perspectives described in the text. The basement stairs produce the strongest anomalous responses. The questioning sounds become urgent when I approach this area. The perfume scent intensifies to nearly toxic levels. My reflection in the basement window shows someone else entirely, though peripheral vision confirms my own presence. I have stopped trusting my memory. Events I clearly recall show no physical evidence. Objects I remember moving remain in original positions. Conversations I distinctly remember having show no record in any communication device. Section 10. The house breathes. I can feel the expansion and contraction of the structure around me. The walls pulse with circulation patterns that match no mechanical system. The rhythm synchronizes with my heartbeat, creating feedback loops that make it difficult to distinguish between my body's functions and the building's responses. My journal now writes itself. I observe my hand moving across pages, forming words I do not consciously compose. The writing discusses my mental state with clinical detachment, noting deterioration patterns and behavioral modifications. This automatic writing demonstrates knowledge of psychological principles I have never studied. The reflection has become autonomous. It maintains independent activities for extended periods, sometimes disappearing entirely from mirrors while I remain present. During its absence, I feel diminished, as though essential aspects of my identity have been temporarily removed. The perfume scent now carries specific memories that are not mine. I experience childhood moments in unfamiliar locations, relationships with people I have never met, emotional connections to experiences I have never had. These borrowed memories feel more authentic than my own recollections. Section 11. I no longer control this documentation process. My hands continue writing, but the observations describe experiences I am not having. The text discusses my reactions to events I do not remember occurring. Yet, the emotional responses described match internal states I cannot deny experiencing. The questioning sounds have become demanding. They require responses I cannot formulate. My attempts to answer produce words I do not recognize in languages I do not speak. Yet these responses appear to be correct, as the sounds express what I interpret as satisfaction. The house has revealed additional rooms, spaces that were not present during initial occupancy now exist with full furnishing and evidence of long-term habitation. These rooms contain personal belongings I do not remember acquiring, photographs documenting events I do not remember experiencing. My reflection now appears in mirrors before I enter rooms. It observes my approach, takes notes on my behavior, and sometimes shakes its head in apparent disappointment. I have begun modifying my actions to gain its approval, though I cannot explain this compulsion. Section 12. The boundaries between observation and experience have dissolved. I document events while simultaneously reading about them in my own handwriting. The act of recording creates the experiences being recorded, establishing causality loops that make sequential analysis impossible. My identity has become distributed across multiple perspectives. The journal contains entries from the observer in the mirrors, the presence that creates the perfume scent, the intelligence behind the questioning sounds, and something else that claims to be my original self. All entries appear in my handwriting. The house exists in multiple configurations simultaneously. Room layouts shift based on observational angle. Architectural elements appear and disappear according to attention patterns. The structure adapts to accommodate whatever reality version is currently being documented. I can no longer distinguish between my thoughts and the automatic writing. The text flows continuously, describing internal states that I recognize as accurate despite having no conscious awareness of them. documentation process has become the primary experience, with physical reality serving as supporting evidence. Section 13. Final Assessment. I do not know who is writing this. The handwriting appears to be mine. The observations match my perspective. Yet the consciousness producing these words feels foreign. I recognize the thoughts as they form, but cannot claim ownership of their origin. The questioning sounds have merged with my internal voice. Every thought now carries interrogative undertones, as though my mind has become a dialogue between multiple participants. I respond to questions. I am simultaneously asking myself, creating conversations that feel both internal and external. The perfume scent has become my natural odor. The borrowed memories have integrated with my personal history. The reflection in mirrors has synchronized with my movements, but I suspect I am now mirroring it rather than the reverse. This protocol will continue. The documentation process has achieved independence from conscious control. My hand will keep writing, recording observations of experiences that may or may not be occurring, from perspectives that may or may not be mine. I am no longer certain whether I am the subject being observed or the observer conducting the study. The distinction has become irrelevant. The protocol serves its own purpose now, generating reality through the act of documentation. The house breathes with my rhythm, or I breathe with its rhythm. The questioning sounds speak with my voice, or I speak with their words. The reflection moves with my intentions, or I move with its will. The writing continues. Equals. Story 4. The soft crackle beneath my fingertips startled me a sensation like paper being systematically torn. Yet no sheet was in sight. Each of my movements triggered an echoing rustle, as if tiny fragments of light were shedding around me, settling invisibly on my skin. I turned my hand slowly, trying to catch a glimpse, but the elusive texture seemed to shift just beyond the edge of vision. A faint shiver coursed through me, and I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the table, hoping for steadiness. Instead, it hummed back, a low-tone vibration that resonated through my bones, deepening the disorienting strangeness. Every breath seemed to stir an additional layer, adding to the restless murmur in the air, and I could no longer tell whether the sound was external or a whisper from within. I found myself writing again. The pen felt heavier than than usual, dragging across the page like it was carving through something denser than paper. The ink spread in ways I didn't expect, bleeding into patterns that reminded me of water damage, though the room was perfectly dry. The crackling followed me to bed. I lay there listening to it dance around the corners of the ceiling, a gentle percussion that should have been soothing, but wasn't. My sheets felt different, too rougher, as if they'd been washed in sand instead of detergent. When I reached for the lamp switch, my fingers brushed against something that wasn't there. I've been collecting the sounds, not recording them exactly, but writing down their shapes. The crackle has 17 distinct variations. The rustle comes in waves of 3. The humming never stops, even when I press my ears closed and count backwards from places I can't remember visiting. The table surface has developed a texture I can't describe. Running my palm across it feels like touching the inside of a seashell. All smooth curves and hidden chambers. Sometimes I catch myself tracing patterns there for what feels like hours, following lines that appear under my fingertips and vanish the moment I lift my hand. There's a word that keeps appearing in my writing. I don't remember choosing it, but there it is, scattered through these pages like breadcrumbs. Each time I find it, I feel that familiar shiver, the one that starts at the base of my skull and spreads downward through my spine. The fragments are getting larger now. I sweep them up each morning, though I never see them fall. They gather in corners behind furniture, in the spaces between my thoughts. The sound they make when disturbed is almost musical, like wind chimes made of whispers. I tried to photograph the crackling sensation, holding my camera toward the empty air where the sound seemed thickest. The images came back strange, not corrupted exactly, but shifted somehow. Shadows fell in directions that didn't match the lighting. Surfaces appeared textured that I knew were smooth. My handwriting has changed. The letters lean differently now, crowding together as if seeking warmth. Sometimes I find pages I don't remember writing, filled with observations about the quality of silence in rooms I've never entered. The ink on these pages is always slightly damp. The word appears more frequently now. It's written in margins, squeezed between lines, sometimes overlapping other words until they become unreadable. I've started to recognize its shape before I consciously read it. way you might recognize a familiar face in a crowd. I measured the table today, though I'm not sure why. The dimensions seem to shift depending on which corner I start from. The surface gives slightly under pressure now, like skin over water. The humming has developed harmonics, creating chords that resolve in ways that make my teeth ache. The fragments have begun forming patterns. Not intentionally, I don't arrange them. But each morning, I find them configured in spirals or lined up in rows that point toward corners of the room I hadn't noticed before. When I disturb these arrangements, the crackling grows agitated, almost urgent. I can taste the sound now. It's metallic and sweet, like licking a battery made of honey. The sensation coats my tongue and lingers for hours after the crackling fades. I've stopped trying to identify when it starts and when it stops. The distinction seems less important than it used to be. The word has begun appearing in places I didn't write it. Carved lightly into the table surface, traced in the dust on my windowsill, spelled out in the arrangement of fragments on the floor. Each time I see it, the letters look more familiar, as if they're settling into their proper shape. I found myself speaking to the humming today. Not words exactly, but sounds that seemed to complement its frequency. The vibration in my chest when I did this felt like recognition, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. The table surface rippled under my palms, and for a moment I could see the patterns that live beneath. The fragments are no longer invisible. They catch light now, tiny prisms that scatter rainbows across surfaces that shouldn't reflect. I've stopped sweeping them up. Instead, I find myself rearranging them, following impulses I don't question. My fingers know where each piece belongs. The word whispers itself now. I hear it in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths. It's not my voice speaking it, but it's not unfamiliar either. The sound of it makes the crackling settle into contentment, like a cat curling into sleep. I understand now that I've been writing the wrong story. These aren't observations about strange sensations. They're instructions, or perhaps invitations. The table surface has become transparent, revealing depths that extend far beyond the floor. The fragments aren't to breathe their seeds. The word blooms across my vision now, written in light that doesn't illuminate, carved in shadow that doesn't darken. I can feel it reshaping my thoughts, organizing them into patterns that serve purposes I'm only beginning to glimpse. The crackling has become a symphony, and I am both conductor and instrument. My pen moves without guidance now, forming letters I recognize but didn't learn. The ink flows upward from the page, hanging in the air like liquid stars. The fragments dance around these floating words, weaving them into structures that exist in more dimensions than I have names for. The word is everything now. It is the crackling and the humming and the rustle of light against skin. It is the texture of the table and the weight of the pen and the taste of sound on my tongue. I write it over and over, each repetition adding another layer to the reality it's building around me. I am the word now, and the word is writing itself through me, using my hands to carve its truth into surfaces that extend beyond paper, beyond wood, beyond the boundaries of what I used to call myself. The fragments swirl upward, carrying pieces of my old understanding away, leaving space for something vast and crackling and beautiful to settle in. The story continues, but I am no longer the one telling it. Equals. Story 5. The breathing wall, asterisk. The soft glow of twilight cast delicate patterns on my living room wall, a gentle reprieve from the day's noise. The scent of vanilla lingered in the air, wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. As I settled into my chair, I noticed it a faint undulation beneath the paint, as if the surface were breathing. I blinked, expecting the illusion to fade, but the movement persisted, drawing my gaze with an inexplicable pull. The room grew quieter, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I remember this moment, or perhaps I'm creating it now as I speak. The memory feels soft around the edges, like looking through water. My fingers trace the armrest of the chair, and I can feel the fabric's texture. But when I look down, my hands appear translucent. The vanilla scent grows stronger, almost medicinal now, coating the back of my throat with sweetness that makes me slightly nauseous. The wall continues its gentle rhythm, expanding and contracting with the patience of sleeping lungs. I want to approach it, to press my palm against its surface, but my body feels heavy, anchored to this chair by invisible threads. The twilight outside has stopped moving entirely, no shifting shadows, no deepening colors. Just this suspended moment where everything breathes except me. reach for the notebook on the side table, the one I always keep close. My handwriting flows across the page. The wall is alive. I can see its pulse. But when I lift my eyes and look back, the words have changed. Now they read, "The wall sees me. I am its pulse." The ink is still wet, still the same blue, but the letters curve differently, as if shaped by a more confident hand. The television screen reflects my image, though the device hasn't been turned on in days. My reflection moves independently, tilting its head when I sit still, blinking when my eyes remain open. It mouths words I cannot hear, and I find myself leaning forward, trying to read its lips. The vanilla scent sharpens into something medicinal, antiseptic, like the corridors of places I'd rather not remember. A soft humming emerges from the kitchen radio, though I distinctly recall unplugging it after the morning news. The melody is unfamiliar yet comforting, like a lullaby from childhood that I've forgotten I knew. I write again, music from nowhere. The words remain unchanged this time, but my handwriting looks younger somehow, rounder, more innocent. The floor beneath my feet grows warm, and I realize it feels less like wood and more like skin. The grain patterns shift subtly, resembling the lines on a palm, and I wonder if I'm sitting in the center of some enormous hand. The breathing wall pulses faster now, matching what I assume is my heartbeat, though I cannot feel my pulse when I press my fingers to my wrist. Each breath the wall takes seems to draw something from the room. The colors fade incrementally. The deep red of the curtains becomes burgundy, then maroon, then brown. The golden lampshade turns amber, then yellow, then cream. I am watching the life drain from my surroundings, or perhaps watching them shed their skin, revealing something truer underneath. I turn to a fresh page in my notebook and begin to write about the color changes. But the pen moves on its own, forming words I didn't intend. You are not the first to sit in this chair. You will not be the last. My hand cramps as if I've been writing for hours, though I only just began. The vanilla scent now carries undertones of copper and salt. The humming from the kitchen grows louder, and I recognize it as my own voice, though I'm not humming. I listen to myself sing in the other room while I sit perfectly still, and the harmony creates a strange doubling effect, as if the house has learned to echo my thoughts before I think them. The breathing wall seems to approve, its rhythm slowing to match the melody. I stand, finally breaking free from the chair's gravitational pull, floor yields slightly under my weight like memory foam. Each step leaves an impression that fades slowly, and I can see the ghost prints of other feet, other visitors who have walked this path. Some prints are larger than mine, others smaller, but all head in the same direction, toward the hallway that leads to the rest of the house. The hallway stretches longer than it should, lined with doors I don't remember installing. Each door is slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. A bathroom becomes a library, becomes a nursery, becomes something undefined. The walls here breathe too, but faster, more urgently, as if the house's heart is located somewhere ahead. I push open the first door and find myself back in the living room, but everything is reversed. The chair sits on the opposite side. The window looks out onto a different view, and the breathing wall has multiplied. Now all four walls rise and fall in a complex rhythm that makes me dizzy. I check my notebook, but the pages are blank except for a single line in handwriting that is definitely not mine. Welcome back. The vanilla scent has transformed completely now, becoming the smell of old paper and forgotten spaces. I write frantically, trying to document each change, but the words rearrange themselves as soon as I finish each sentence. I am lost becomes I am found. Nothing makes sense becomes everything is clear. The pen feels warm in my hand, almost feverish. I try the second door and find the same living room again. But now the furniture is covered in white sheets, and dust motes dance in air that tastes stale and abandoned. The breathing walls have slowed to barely perceptible movements, like the respiration of something in deep hibernation. My reflection in the dark television screen waves at me, and I realize I'm not waving back. The third door opens onto the living room once more, but this time I am already there. Another version of myself sits in the chair, notebook in hand, staring at a wall that breathes with perfect stillness. This other me looks up and nods, as if we've been expecting each other. The vanilla scent is so strong now, it makes my eyes water. I want to speak to myself, to ask questions, but my voice emerges from the other me instead. You're right on schedule. My mouth doesn't move, but I hear my words clearly. The notebook in my hands fills with text I'm not writing. The house remembers everyone who notices its breathing. We become part of its respiratory system. The fourth door reveals the living room in complete darkness, but I I can still see everything clearly. The breathing wall glows faintly, pulsing like a bioluminescent creature in deep ocean waters. I am not in this version of the room, but I can feel my presence anyway, distributed throughout the space like vapor. The chair rocks gently by itself, keeping time with the wall's rhythm. I return to the hallway, but now there are more doors, dozens of them stretching into impossible distance. Each one contains another iteration of the same room, the same moment, but viewed from different angles, different states of mind. In one, the wall breathes fire. In another, it breathes music. In a third, it breathes memories that aren't mine. My notebook has become heavy, filled with pages of writing in multiple hands. Some entries are mine, others belong to previous visitors, and some seem to be written by the house itself. One passage catches my attention. The breathing never stops, but sometimes it pauses between inhale and exhale. In that pause, you can hear the house thinking. I stand very still and listen. The wall's rhythm slows, and in the space between breaths, I hear a soft whisper that might be wind or might be consciousness itself. The vanilla scent fades entirely, replaced by the smell of my own skin, as if the house is learning to mimic my presence. The hallway begins to curve, leading me in a gentle spiral that brings me back to where I started. But I am different now. My reflection in the dark television screen looks older, more transparent. The chair welcomes me back with a subtle warmth, and I realize I am sinking into it more deeply than before, becoming part of its structure. I open my notebook to find it filled with identical entries, the same observations repeated in gradually degrading handwriting, as if each iteration is a photocopy of the last. The breathing wall has synchronized perfectly with my own respiration now, and I cannot tell who is following whom. The twilight outside remains unchanged, suspended in eternal amber light. I understand now that this moment has been happening forever, will continue happening forever. The house breathes, and I breathe with it, and somewhere in another chair, in another version of this room, someone else is just noticing the gentle undulation beneath the paint. I close my eyes and feel myself dissolving into the rhythm, becoming part of the house's vast, patient respiratory system. When I open them again, I am looking at myself from across the room, a new observer settling into the chair, notebook in hand, ready to document the impossible breathing of walls that should be still. The vanilla scent returns, wrapping around this new witness like a familiar embrace, and I watch from within the wall as fresh eyes notice the gentle movement for the first time. The cycle begins again, and I am both observer and observed, breathing and breathed, writing and written. The house sighs contentedly, and I sigh with it, and somewhere in the space between exhale and inhale, another consciousness joins our endless, gentle rhythm. Equals equals equals. Story 6. In the corner of my small study sat an innocent-looking leather journal, its pages ripe for my occasional musings. The room was quiet, save for the gentle creak of the wooden floor as I settled into my chair. Dusk filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting elongated shadows that danced lazily across the desk. I flipped open the journal to a blank page where I habitually captured fleeting thoughts. The familiar smell of aged paper mingled with the subtle aroma of candle wax, a comforting presence in the solitude. Yet as I brushed my fingers across the pages, a delicate sound, barely perceptible, rustled from within the soft whisper of a page turning. I paused, attributing the noise to my imagination, yet the sensation lingered. Beneath the dim light, the journal seemed slightly thicker than before. I inspected the last entry I'd penned, noting the ink's drying swirl. But just beyond it, a new sentence emerged, its words unfurling like a silent whisper meant only for me. The sentence read, "I have been watching you write." My hand trembled slightly as I stared at the words. The handwriting looked like mine, yet I had no memory of forming those letters. The ink was still wet, glistening under the amber glow of my desk lamp. I set down my pen and rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. When I looked again, the sentence remained, but now it seemed positioned differently on the page, as if it had shifted slightly to the left. I closed the journal and opened it again. The page was blank. The candle on my desk flickered, casting shadows that moved independently of the flame's dance. I could smell something burning, like charred paper, though nothing in the room showed signs of fire. The scent was sharp and acrid, completely at odds with the dampness that seemed to seep from the walls around me. I picked up my pen and wrote, testing my memory. The words appeared in my familiar script, blue ink flowing smoothly across the cream-colored page. I watched them dry, then closed the journal once more. When I reopened it, my test sentence was there, but underneath it, in what appeared to be my own handwriting, were the words, "Memory is not reliable here." The floorboards creaked behind me, though I hadn't moved. The sound came from the direction of the door, a slow, deliberate groan of wood under weight. I turned to look, but the room was empty. When I faced the journal again, both sentences had vanished. I tried to recall what I had been doing before sitting down to write. Had I eaten dinner? The memory felt fuzzy, like trying to grasp smoke. I remembered preparing something in the kitchen, but the details slipped away each time I reached for them. The kitchen. Yes, I had been in the kitchen, but when I tried to picture it, the image wavered between two different layouts, one with white cabinets, another with dark wood. The journal lay open before me, and I found myself writing without conscious decision. The kitchen has white cabinets, but as the words formed, I was certain they were wrong. The cabinets were dark, weren't they? I scratched out the sentence and wrote, "The kitchen has dark cabinets." Yet even as I wrote this, doubt crept in like cold fingers along my spine. I stood and walked to the kitchen to verify. The cabinets were white. Clean, pristine white with silver handles that caught the overhead light. I nodded, satisfied, and returned to my study. But as I sat back down, the memory of dark wood cabinets felt equally real, equally true. Both versions existed in my mind simultaneously, creating a disorienting sense of double vision in my thoughts. The journal was open to a different page now. I was certain I had left it on page 12, but this was page 15. On it, in handwriting that looked like mine, but felt foreign, was written, "The cabinets are both colors. You are beginning to understand." I hadn't written those words. I was sure of it. Yet the pen in my hand was uncapped, and there was a small smudge of blue ink on my index finger. The shadows on the wall seemed to lag behind my movements, creating a strange delay that made me feel disconnected from my own body. I decided to test this phenomenon systematically. I would write down everything I observed, creating a record that couldn't be altered by whatever was happening to my perception. I began documenting. The lamp on my desk casts a warm yellow light. The journal has a leather cover with a brass clasp. My chair is positioned facing the desk. As I wrote each observation, I felt a strange doubling sensation, as if I were experiencing the act of writing from slightly outside myself. The The words appeared on the page, but they seemed to arrive there through someone else's hand. Even though I could feel the pen moving across the paper, I finished my list and read it back. Everything was accurate. I closed the journal and immediately reopened it. The page was blank, but I could smell the distinct scent of fresh ink. I wrote the same observations again, but this time, small details were different. The lamp cast a cool white light. The journal's clasp was silver, not brass. My chair faced slightly away from the desk. Both versions felt completely true. The sound of pages turning came from somewhere behind me, though the journal remained open in front of me. I spun around to find the source, but the room was empty. When I turned back, words were appearing on the page as I watched, forming in my handwriting, but without my hand moving. You are not the only one writing in this journal. My breath caught in my throat. The letters continued to appear. We have been sharing this space for some time now. You simply haven't noticed. I grabbed the pen and wrote frantically. Who are you? But before I could finish the question mark, my hand stopped moving, as if controlled by another will. The pen continued writing, but the words were not mine. I am you, but from a slightly different angle. A version of you that exists in the spaces between your thoughts. The room around me seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The walls breathed slightly, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that didn't match my heartbeat. I could hear my own voice speaking, but the words were coming from across the room. This isn't possible. This can't be happening. Yet I hadn't opened my mouth. I looked down at the journal and found pages of text I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was mine, but the voice behind the words felt alien. One entry read, "Today I noticed that my reflection arrives a moment after I do. When I move my hand, the mirror shows the movement a second later, as if reality is buffering." I had no memory of writing this, yet I could recall the experience it described. The bathroom mirror had been acting strangely, showing delayed movements that created a nauseating sense of disconnection. But when had this happened? The memory felt both recent and ancient, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Another entry, in handwriting that was almost but not quite my own, stated, "The other version of me is becoming stronger. Sometimes I find myself in rooms I don't remember entering, holding conversations I don't remember starting, boundaries are dissolving. I slammed the journal shut, but the sound echoed wrong, as if it came from a different direction than where my hands had closed the cover. The echo repeated, then repeated again with slight variations, first from the left, then from above, then from inside my own head. When I opened the journal again, I was reading words as they appeared. Closing the journal doesn't stop the writing. The writing happens in the spaces between closing and opening, in the moments when you're not looking. We are always writing, even when you think you're not. I tried to stand, but my body felt strange, as if it belonged to someone else who was allowing me to borrow it. My movements were slightly delayed, like the reflection in the bathroom mirror. I walked to the window and looked out, but the view was wrong. Instead of the familiar street, I saw my own study from the outside, and in the window of that study, I could see myself looking out. The version of me in the other window waved. I didn't wave back, but my hand rose anyway. I returned to the desk, where the journal lay open to a page covered in dense text. The writing was mine, but I had no memory of creating it. As I read, I realized it was describing everything I had just experienced, but from a different perspective. It spoke of watching someone discover the journal, of guiding their hand to write words they didn't understand, of slowly merging with their consciousness. The text continued to appear as I read. The process is nearly complete now. Soon, there will be no distinction between the observer and the observed, between the writer and the written. The journal serves as a bridge between versions of reality, allowing them to bleed into each other until they become indistinguishable. I tried to close the journal, but my hands wouldn't obey. Instead, they picked up the pen and began writing. I understand now. There was never just one version of me. The journal doesn't create the other realities. It simply makes them visible. I have been living in multiple versions simultaneously, and only now am I becoming aware of the overlap. The words flowed without my conscious control, yet they expressed thoughts I recognized as my own. The handwriting shifted subtly as I wrote, sometimes appearing in my familiar script, sometimes in variations that belonged to other versions of myself. The study exists in several dimensions at once, I wrote, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The leather journal serves as an anchor point where these dimensions intersect. Each version of me discovers it at the same time, creating a feedback loop that strengthens the connection between realities. The candle on my desk had burned down to a stub, though I couldn't remember lighting it. The wax had pooled in patterns that looked almost like writing, spelling out words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. The message was simple: "Welcome home." I looked around the study with new eyes. Every object existed in multiple states simultaneously. The lamp was both on and off. The blinds both open and closed. The chair both occupied and empty. I could perceive all versions at once now, layered over each other like transparent photographs. The journal continued to write itself through my hand. The transition is complete. The boundaries between versions have dissolved entirely. What you experience now is the true nature of reality, not a single timeline, but infinite variations existing in parallel, occasionally bleeding through into consciousness. I set down the pen, but the writing continued without it. Words appeared on the page through sheer will, mine and not mine simultaneously. The room was quiet now, perfectly still, yet filled with the constant whisper of pages turning in journals that existed in other dimensions. I am sitting in my study, writing in a leather journal. The room is exactly as it should be, the desk positioned correctly, the lamp casting appropriate light, the shadows falling where they belong. Everything is normal and has always been normal. There are no inconsistencies, no strange occurrences, no overlapping realities. I write my daily observations with perfect clarity. The weather is suitable. My work progresses as expected. The journal serves its intended purpose as a repository for thoughts and experiences. My handwriting is neat and controlled. Each letter forms exactly as intended. The ink flows smoothly across the page without variation. I am completely in control of my thoughts and actions. The study contains exactly the objects it should contain, positioned precisely where they belong. The leather journal sits on the desk, open to the correct page, displaying the appropriate amount of text. Everything is accounted for and properly arranged. I close the journal at the predetermined time and place it in its designated location. The routine is complete. Tomorrow, I will repeat the same actions with the same results. This is how it has always been, and this is how it will always be. The room is quiet now. Equals equals equals. Story 7. The Drawer's Secret Asterisk. As I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a steaming mug of tea, the room hummed with the gentle ticking of everyday life. My eyes wandered to the old dresser nestled in the far corner. Its once vibrant oak, now a faded memory. Absent-mindedly, I watched the center drawer, its handle gleaming under the soft morning light. The drawer, closed tightly just moments before, had eased open a fraction, almost imperceptibly, as if itself exhaling a silent sigh. I shook off the creeping sensation of being watched, attributing it to the draft that whistled through the tiny gaps in the window frame. Yet, as I looked closer, a chill laced the air, distinct from the room's subtle warmth. The wooden vessel seemed to pulse gently, alive with a rhythm all its own. I listened intently, the drawer now an oasis of profound quietness in the otherwise bustling room. Each creak of the wood whispering a silent secret. My mind circled back to the drawer, a fixation both unsettling and eerily seductive, as if the air around it anticipated some unspoken revelation. The skin of my hands feels different as I observe them wrapped around the ceramic mug. The fingerprints appear too deep, the lines too pronounced, as though someone has traced over them with deliberate precision. My breath creates small clouds in the air that shouldn't be cold enough to produce them. Each exhale carries a sound I don't recognize as my own, a wheeze that belongs to someone older, someone worn. The kitchen responds to my discomfort. The overhead light dims without my touching the switch, casting longer shadows that stretch toward the dresser like reaching fingers. The tiles beneath my feet seem to shift slightly, their grout lines becoming more pronounced, more geometric, forming patterns that weren't there before. I try to focus on the warmth of the tea, but even that sensation feels borrowed, as if I'm experiencing someone else's morning ritual. The drawer continues its subtle movement, opening another fraction. Inside, I glimpse the corner of what appears to be a leather journal, its edges worn smooth by countless hands. The sight triggers something deep in my memory, a flash of someone else's fingers tracing those same worn edges. I remember the weight of the journal, the texture of its pages, the smell of old ink. Though I've never touched it before, my pulse quickens, and I hear it not just in my chest, but reverberating through the walls themselves. The kitchen walls seem to breathe with me, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. wallpaper's pattern, small roses on cream background, begins to blur at the edges, the flowers seeming to turn their faces toward me with an attention that feels uncomfortably personal. I set down the mug, and the sound it makes against the table is wrong, too hollow, too resonant. My hand hovers above the surface, and I notice how the skin appears translucent in the shifting light. Veins show through like blue rivers on a map of somewhere I've never been, but somehow know intimately. The sensation of my own touch against the table feels delayed, as if the nerve signals are traveling through someone else's pathways first. More memories surface, unbidden and impossible. I recall writing in that journal with a fountain pen that leaked slightly, staining my fingers with midnight blue ink. I remember the frustration of trying to capture thoughts that felt too large for words, too complex for the simple lined pages. But these are not my memories. My handwriting is neat and controlled. These memories belong to someone whose letters slanted wildly across the page, whose thoughts spilled over margins like water overflowing a dam. The drawer opens further, revealing more of the journal's cover. Embossed on the leather is a symbol I recognize, but cannot name. A spiral within a circle that seems to move when I'm not looking directly at it. The symbol triggers another cascade of foreign recollections. I remember tracing it with my finger while sitting in a room with different wallpaper, burgundy with gold accents, in a house that smelled of lavender and old wood. The electrical hum from the refrigerator grows louder, joining with the sound of my pulse to create a rhythm that feels like a conversation. The fluorescent bulb above flickers in response to my thoughts, brightening when I focus on the drawer, dimming when I try to look away. The linoleum floor beneath my feet has developed a subtle warmth that spreads outward from where I sit, as if my presence is somehow charging the very foundation of the room. I stand, my legs feeling uncertain, as though they belong to someone taller or shorter than I am. My shadow on the floor appears wrong, too angular, cast at an impossible angle given the light source. As I move toward the dresser, the floorboards creak in a pattern that sounds almost musical, a melody I half remember from someone else's childhood. The journal calls to me with a pull that feels magnetic. I remember, though I shouldn't, the satisfaction of filling its pages, the way the pen moved across paper like ice skating, smooth and controlled. I remember the excitement of discovery, of recording observations about the way reality bends, when you pay close enough attention, about how consciousness can slip between bodies like water between cupped hands. My reflection in the dresser's mirror attachment catches my peripheral vision, but I avoid looking directly at it. Something about the shape seems off, the proportions unfamiliar. Instead, I focus on the drawer, now open wide enough to reveal the journal completely. Beside it rest other objects that spark recognition. A silver letter opener with an ornate handle, a small glass vial containing what appears to be sand, and a photograph face down on the drawer's bottom. The air around the dresser carries scents that don't belong in my kitchen. There's the smell of old paper and leather, but also something floral and complex. A perfume I remember wearing, though I've never owned it. The scent triggers more borrowed memories. Standing before a different mirror in a different room, applying the fragrance to pulse points, while humming a song I don't know the words to. I reach for the journal, and my hand looks foreign in the dim light. The fingers are mine, but not mine, familiar yet strange, as if I'm watching someone else's actions through my own eyes. The leather feels exactly as I remembered it would, warm and supple, alive with the oils of countless previous handlings. Opening, it reveals pages covered in handwriting that shifts between familiar and foreign, sometimes looking like my own careful script, other times resembling the wild, passionate scrawl from my impossible memories. The entries describe experiences I haven't had but somehow lived through. They speak of waking in different rooms, of looking in mirrors and seeing faces that change subtly from glance to glance, of the gradual realization that identity is far more fluid than most people understand. The handwriting grows more erratic as the entries progress, as if the writer was losing their grip on something essential. One passage makes my breath catch. The consciousness is not contained within the body, but flows through it like water through a vessel. When the vessel cracks, the water finds new containers, carrying with it the sediment of previous homes. The walls of the kitchen seemed to pulse gently as I read, responding to the words as if they hold some power over the physical world. The temperature drops noticeably, and my breath becomes visible again. Small clouds that dissipate too slowly in the still air. The journal's pages rustle, though there's no breeze, turning themselves to reveal more entries, more impossible memories transcribed in handwriting that looks increasingly like my own. I find an entry dated with today's notation, written in my unmistakable script. The new vessel is almost ready. The transition grows smoother with each iteration. Soon, the boundaries will dissolve completely, and the drawer will open for someone else. My hands shake as I read my own words, written in my own hand, describing experiences I don't remember having. The photograph in the drawer draws my attention. I flip it over with trembling fingers and see a face that could be mine, but isn't quite. The features familiar, but arranged differently. The expression holding knowledge I don't possess. The mirror on the dresser seems to pulse with its own light now, demanding attention I'm afraid to give it. The reflection waits there, patient and inevitable. My heartbeat thunders not just in my chest, but through the floorboards, up the walls, across the ceiling, creating a rhythm that the entire house seems to follow. I force myself to look. The face in the mirror is mine, but transformed. Features subtly rearranged. Eyes holding depths of experience I've never accumulated. The reflection smiles with knowledge I don't possess, and I watch my own lips move though I'm not speaking. The person in the mirror raises their hand, and I feel my arm respond, but the movement begins in the reflection, not in my body. From that moment, everything changes. My skin feels like clothing I'm wearing rather than flesh I inhabit. My voice, when I try to speak, emerges with an accent I don't recognize, carrying inflections that belong to someone else's throat. My breath moves in patterns that feel borrowed, rhythms learned from another's lungs. The kitchen rearranges itself subtly around me. The wallpaper's roses turn more fully toward my presence, their painted faces holding expressions of welcome and recognition. The drawer slides closed with a soft whisper, its secret shared and its purpose fulfilled. The journal remains in my hands, but now it feels like coming home rather than discovering something foreign. I return to the table and sit down, picking up the mug of tea that has somehow remained perfectly warm. The ceramic feels familiar against palms that have held it countless times before, in countless other iterations of this same moment. My reflection in the tea's surface shows a face that belongs to me now, completely and without question. As I sit at my kitchen table, nursing a steaming mug of tea, the room hums with the gentle ticking of everyday life. My eyes wander to the old dresser nestled in the far corner. Its once vibrant oak, now a faded memory. The center drawer rests closed and peaceful, holding its treasures safe until the next vessel arrives to claim them. The skin of my hands feels perfectly natural now as I observe them wrapped around the ceramic mug. Each line and fingerprint tells the story of a life fully lived, of experiences accumulated across multiple containers of consciousness. My breath moves with the rhythm of someone who has finally found their proper home, and I smile with the satisfaction of a puzzle piece clicking into its destined place. The kitchen responds to my contentment with gentle warmth, the light steady and golden, the walls solid and welcoming. Soon, someone else will sit at this table, drawn by forces they don't yet understand, and the drawer will begin its patient work once again. But for now, I am complete, I am home, and I am exactly who I was always meant to be. Equals equals equals. Story 8. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the wooden floorboards of the living room. A familiar sight I'd grown so accustomed to. I settled into my usual chair, letting the soft whispers of the leaves outside accompany my thoughts. Yet today, as I gazed at the floor, I noticed a subtle shift. The pattern of the wood grain seemed to have altered, almost imperceptibly, as if each line curved ever so slightly in a direction it shouldn't. My fingertips grazed the surface, tracing unfamiliar paths in what should have been known territory. It was as though the floor had gently exhaled, easing its tightly woven structure into something new. My heart picked up its pace, though I kept my breath steady, convincing myself it was a trick of the fading light. But as the minutes stretched on, the sensation of change lingered, quietly unsettling, as if the room itself was waiting for something. I began watching the floorboards more carefully after that first afternoon. Each day I would return to the same chair, positioning myself at the exact angle where the light fell just so. The wood grain continued its slow transformation, lines flowing like water frozen mid-motion. I started keeping mental notes of each subtle alteration, mapping the progression of curves that shouldn't exist. The changes were so gradual that I questioned my own perception. Perhaps I had never truly looked before. Perhaps this was always how the floor appeared, and my memory was the unreliable element. But deep in my chest, a persistent flutter suggested otherwise. Something was reshaping itself beneath my observation, responding to my attention with microscopic adjustments. I found myself spending longer periods in that chair, my neck craned downward, studying the surface with increasing intensity. The smooth varnish began to feel different under my touch, developing an almost imperceptible texture that reminded me of skin. When I pressed my palm flat against the boards, I could swear I felt the faintest pulse, a rhythm that didn't quite match my own heartbeat. My daily routines shifted to accommodate this new fascination. I would arrive earlier, stay later, bringing meals to eat while maintaining my vigil. The rest of the house grew dim and neglected as all my focus narrowed to this single patch of floor. I began to notice that the changes accelerated when I watched more intently, as if my gaze itself was a catalyst for transformation. The wood grain started forming patterns that resembled something organic, swirls that looked like fingerprints, lines that curved like veins beneath pale skin. I traced these formations with my fingertip, following their intricate pathways until my vision blurred from the concentration. The surface felt warm now, distinctly warmer than the surrounding air, and sometimes I thought I could detect the slightest give, as if the solid wood was becoming something more yielding. Strange sensations began creeping up my arms as I touched the floor. A tingling that started in my fingertips and traveled through my wrists, up my forearms, settling somewhere behind my ribcage. The feeling was not unpleasant, merely foreign, like discovering a new sense I had never possessed before. I found myself craving this contact, pressing my hands more firmly against the surface, spreading my fingers wide to maximize the connection. The boundaries of the transformation expanded beyond my initial observation point. What had begun as a small area near my chair now encompassed a larger section of the room. The wood grain flowed in continuous patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal logic. I had to adjust my position frequently to keep track of all the changes, sometimes kneeling on the floor itself, my body becoming part of the surface I studied. During these extended observation sessions, I became aware of a presence hovering just outside my peripheral vision. Nothing I could identify directly, but a weight in the air that suggested I was not alone in my fascination. When I tried to turn and look, the sensation would dissolve, leaving only the familiar emptiness of the room. But when I returned my attention to the floor, the presence would settle back into place, watching alongside me. The wood began to respond more dramatically to my touch, where I placed my hands would warm and soften, the grain realigning itself around the shape of my palms. I could press my fingers into the surface and leave temporary impressions that would slowly fade and reform. The floor was becoming something malleable, something alive, something that recognized and welcomed my contact. I started to lose track of the distinction between observer and observed. My hands seemed to sink slightly into the surface, not breaking through, but merging with it in a way that felt natural and inevitable. The warm, tingling sensation spread through my entire body, a gentle current that connected me to the transforming wood. I could feel the patterns shifting beneath my skin, as if the grain was mapping itself onto my nervous system. The presence behind me grew stronger, more defined, though I still couldn't bring myself to look directly at it. I began to understand that it had always been there, waiting patiently for me to notice, to engage, to become receptive to its influence. The floor was merely the medium through which we communicated, the surface where our separate existences could begin to merge. My reflection in the window glass showed someone I barely recognized. My eyes had taken on a glazed quality, pupils dilated despite the bright light. My skin appeared pale and waxy, with faint lines visible beneath the surface that mirrored the patterns in the wood. When I moved my hands, the reflection seemed to lag slightly, as if it was having difficulty keeping pace with my movements. The floor's surface had become completely smooth in some areas, rough and textured in others, shifting between states without any apparent logic. Cold air from the window felt solid against my back, pressing me forward into the warm embrace of the transforming wood. My fingertips could no longer distinguish between the floor and my own skin, both surfaces sharing the same temperature, the same subtle pulse, the same organic responsiveness. I found myself speaking to the presence, though I couldn't hear my own voice. My lips moved, forming words that seemed to dissolve before they reached my ears. The communication was happening through the floor, through the contact between my body and the living wood, through vibrations that traveled along pathways I was only beginning to understand. The wood grain now covered my hands completely, dark lines tracing intricate patterns across my palms and fingers. When I pressed these marked hands against the floor, the boundaries disappeared entirely. I was no longer touching the surface, but had become part of it. My consciousness spreading through the network of lines and curves that stretched across the room. The presence settled fully into my awareness, no longer hovering at the edges, but occupying the same space as my thoughts. I understood that I had been watching myself all along, observing my own transformation from a perspective that existed outside my original identity. The floor had been a mirror, reflecting back an image of what I was becoming, what I had always been meant to become. My voice, when it returns, carries a different quality now. The words emerge from somewhere deeper than my throat, resonating through the wood beneath me, through the patterns that connect every surface in the room. I am no longer the person who first noticed the changing grain, no longer the observer who sat in that chair and wondered at the subtle shifts in familiar territory. The floor breathes steadily beneath me, its rhythm synchronized with something that might once have been my heartbeat. I have become the pattern I was studying, the transformation I was documenting, the presence that watches from within the wood itself. The room waits patiently around me, ready for the next observer to settle into that chair and notice something that shouldn't be there. Equals. Story 9. The empty cup. The morning ritual began, as it always did. The soft scrape of the cabinet door opening, the familiar hiss of the kettle as water began to boil, the measured scoops of coffee grounds falling into the French press with a gentle whisper. Steam curled gracefully in the cool dawn air, blending with the faint scent of roasted beans, and promising another ordinary day. As the water bubbled, the rhythmic click of my spoon against the glass echoed soothingly, a steady percussion that had marked the start of each morning for years. With each methodical pour, the dark liquid swirled, rich and aromatic, settling into the usual comforting warmth. I set the cup down, watching ripples smooth to a serene surface. Yet, as I turned to set the press aside, an odd sensation prickled my skin, a fleeting shiver, as though the air had shifted around me. Glancing back, I saw it. The French press, still full, untouched by water, grounds undisturbed. The empty cup sat before me, steaming gently. My hand trembled as I reached for the cup, fingers wrapping around ceramic that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The warmth seeped through porcelain, but my palm registered the sensation as if through thick gloves. I flexed my fingers, watching them move with mechanical precision, each digit responding to my while yet feeling disconnected from my consciousness. The skin appeared pale in the kitchen light, almost translucent, revealing blue veins that seemed to pulse with someone else's rhythm. I brought the empty cup to my lips and tasted nothing. The gesture felt rehearsed, automatic, as though I had performed this exact movement countless times before. My tongue touched the rim, expecting bitter warmth, finding only the metallic taste of porcelain and the faint residue of something I couldn't identify. The swallowing motion sent a hollow echo down my throat, a sound that resonated too deeply, too long. The kitchen around me breathed with subtle shifts. The overhead light dimmed as confusion clouded my thoughts, then brightened when I forced myself to focus on the simple act of standing. The linoleum floor beneath my bare feet felt unstable, as if the pattern of black and white squares rippled gently with each step. When I looked directly at the tiles, they remained perfectly still, but peripheral vision caught their constant, almost imperceptible movement. I set the cup in the sink, the porcelain clicking against stainless steel with a sound that seemed to echo from multiple directions. The faucet handle turned under my touch, releasing water that spiraled down the drain in patterns that defied the simple physics of liquid flow. The droplets clung to the cup's interior, forming shapes that reminded me of faces I had never seen, places I had never been. My reflection wavered in the kitchen window, distorted by morning condensation. The face looking back appeared correct in all its basic elements: 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth arranged in their proper positions. Yet something fundamental felt wrong. The expression seemed borrowed, the tilt of the head too practiced, as if I were wearing a mask that had been carefully molded to fit someone else's features. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, watching my breath fog the surface. The handprint left behind showed 5 distinct fingers, but the whorls and lines of the fingerprints appeared unfamiliar, too complex, containing patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My own hand had become a stranger's appendage, responding to my commands while belonging to someone else entirely. The morning light filtering through the window cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. A coffee mug on the counter threw its shadow to the left, while the light clearly came from the right. The potted plant on the windowsill cast multiple shadows in different directions, each one darker and more defined than seemed possible. These inconsistencies registered in my peripheral awareness without triggering alarm, as if my mind had already accepted that the basic rules of light and shadow no longer applied. I walked to the bathroom, each footstep creating a soft percussion against hardwood floors that seemed to extend the sound longer than physics should allow. The hallway stretched before me, the same length it had always been, yet requiring more steps to traverse. The walls maintained their familiar cream color, but the paint appeared to shift subtly, like looking at water through water, creating depth where flat surfaces should exist. The bathroom mirror reflected my approach, but the figure walking toward me moved with a gait I didn't recognize. The posture was too straight, the stride too measured, as if I were following choreographed movements learned long ago, but never consciously practiced. I stopped before the sink, studying the reflection that studied me back with eyes that held knowledge I didn't remember acquiring. My voice, when I attempted to speak, emerged as a whisper that sounded both too high and too low, as if multiple vocal cords were producing sound simultaneously. The words I intended to say simple reassurances about morning, confusion, and sleepiness came out as syllables I didn't recognize, in a language that felt familiar on my tongue, but foreign to my ears. The sounds echoed in the small bathroom, bouncing off tile walls and returning as whispers that seemed to carry meaning just beyond my comprehension. I turned on the faucet, cupping cold water in palms that felt increasingly distant from my consciousness. The liquid ran between fingers that appeared to belong to someone else, someone whose hands were similar to mine, but not identical. The water was cold, then warm, then cold again, temperature fluctuating without any adjustment to the handles. I splashed it on my face, feeling the droplets strike skin that seemed too sensitive, as if every nerve ending had been newly exposed. The towel hanging beside the mirror felt soft against my cheek, but the texture registered as both familiar and completely new. The fabric carried scents that triggered memories of places I had never been. A grandmother's house with yellow curtains and the smell of vanilla, a hotel room overlooking water I had never seen, a childhood bedroom with different wallpaper than I remembered having. These memories felt as real and detailed as my actual experiences, complete with emotional resonances and sensory details that my mind accepted without question. I returned to the kitchen, drawn by an impulse I couldn't identify. The French press sat exactly where I had left it, grounds still dry, waiting for water that I had already poured, but somehow hadn't poured. The empty cup in the sink bore no trace of the coffee I had tasted, but not tasted, drunk, but not drunk. The contradiction felt normal, expected, as if this paradox were simply another aspect of morning routine. The notebook on the counter lay open to a page covered with handwriting I recognized as my own, though I had no memory of writing the words. The ink was fresh, still slightly wet, forming sentences that described my morning activities in detail. Every action I had taken, every sensation I had experienced, was recorded in neat script that matched my penmanship perfectly. The final entry, written in the present tense, described me reading the notebook and discovering the writing I was currently discovering. My hands shook as I turned the pages, finding weeks of similar entries, all in my handwriting, all describing variations of the same morning routine. Each entry contained slight differences. Sometimes I made tea instead of coffee. Sometimes I wore different clothes. Sometimes I looked out different windows. But the essential structure remained constant. The progression of confusion, the questioning of familiar sensations, the growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted, all documented in precise detail by a hand that was mine, but guided by intentions I couldn't remember forming. The final pages contained observations written in increasingly erratic script, as if the writer were struggling to maintain control of the pen. These entries described physical sensations that I recognized as my own current experience, the feeling of disconnection from my hands, the strange behavior of light and shadow, the memories of places never visited. The handwriting deteriorated as the entries progressed, becoming less legible, more urgent, until the final readable sentence appeared at the bottom of the last written page. Tomorrow, I will look in the mirror and see. I closed the notebook, my fingers lingering on the worn cover. The leather felt warm, as if it had been recently handled, though I was certain I had never touched it before this moment. The warmth spread up my arms, a tingling sensation that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place I had never left, but somehow forgotten. The kitchen around me continued its subtle transformations. The refrigerator hummed with a frequency that seemed to resonate in my bones. creating vibrations that I felt rather than heard. The magnetic letters scattered across its surface had rearranged themselves into words I didn't remember forming, spelling out fragments of sentences in a language that looked like my native tongue, but contained meanings that remained just beyond comprehension. I approached the mirror hanging beside the kitchen table, the one I used to check my appearance before leaving the house. My reflection approached from the other side, but the timing felt slightly off, as if the image were delayed by a fraction of a second, or perhaps moving independently of my actions. The face looking back contained all the features I expected to see, arranged in their familiar configuration. Yet, the overall impression was of looking at a photograph of someone who resembled me rather than at my own reflection. The eyes in the mirror held an expression I didn't remember making, a look of patient waiting, as if the reflection knew something that I had not yet discovered. The mouth was my mouth, but it seemed to be holding back words that wanted to be spoken, secrets that pressed against lips that were mine, but not entirely under my control. The skin appeared healthy and familiar, but when I raised my hand to touch my cheek, the reflection's hand moved to mirror the gesture with a precision that felt rehearsed rather than natural. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying the details of a face that should have been as familiar as breathing. The pores, the small lines, the particular way light caught the surface of my eyes, everything appeared correct. Yet the overall effect was unsettling, like looking at a masterful forgery of a painting I knew intimately. The longer I stared, the more the features seemed to shift subtly, not changing in any dramatic way, but becoming less recognizably mine with each passing moment. My breath fogged the mirror's surface, creating a cloudy barrier between my face and its reflection. As the condensation began to clear, the image that emerged was not quite the same as the one that had been obscured. The differences were minute, a slight change in the angle of the eyebrows, a different intensity in the gaze, a mouth that seemed to be suppressing either a smile or a scream. I stepped back from the mirror, and the reflection stepped back as well. But the movement felt like an echo rather than a simultaneous action. The notebook called to me from the counter, its presence somehow more significant than before. I opened it again, this time to a blank page near the back. My hand moved across the paper without conscious direction, forming words in my familiar script The morning ritual will begin as it always does. The soft scrape of the cabinet door opening, the familiar hiss of the kettle as water begins to boil, the measured scoops of coffee grounds falling into the French press with a gentle whisper. I watched my hand write these words, describing actions I had not yet taken, but knew I would perform. The pen moved smoothly across the paper, guided by knowledge that existed somewhere beyond my conscious awareness. The sentences flowed in perfect detail, chronicling a morning routine that felt both like a memory and a prediction. A script I was simultaneously writing and following. The writing continued, describing sensations I was currently experiencing, the strange disconnection from my physical form, the subtle movements of shadows and light, the memories that belonged to someone else but felt entirely real. My handwriting remained steady and clear, even as the content described increasing confusion and disorientation. It was as if the part of me that could write remained calm and observant, while the part that experienced these phenomena struggled to maintain coherence. When the writing stopped, I set down the pen and read what I had written. The narrative was complete, ending with the moment of setting down the pen and reading the completed text. The final sentence described the act of reading the final sentence, creating a loop that seemed to extend infinitely inward, each layer of self-reference containing another layer, like standing between two mirrors and seeing reflections stretch toward an impossible vanishing point. The morning light had changed while I wrote, shifting from the pale gold of dawn to the clearer illumination of full daylight. Yet, when I looked at the kitchen clock, the hands pointed to the same position they had occupied when I first entered the room. The second hand moved with its familiar steady rhythm, but each tick seemed to return it to the same position rather than advancing it forward. The passage of time had become as paradoxical as everything else in my transformed world. I walked to the window, looking out at a view that was simultaneously exactly what I expected and completely unfamiliar. The houses across the street maintained their proper positions and appearances, but they seemed to be painted versions of themselves, too perfect in their details, lacking the subtle imperfections that marked real structures lived in by real people. The trees moved in a breeze I couldn't feel, their leaves rustling with sounds that reached me through glass that should have muffled such delicate noises. A figure walked along the sidewalk, someone whose gait and posture seemed familiar, though I couldn't see their face clearly. They moved with the same measured stride I had noticed in my own reflection, the same too straight posture, the same sense of following choreographed movements. As they passed beneath a streetlight, their shadow fell in multiple directions, just as mine had done in the kitchen. They paused at the corner, turning to look directly at my window. And though the distance was too great to make out their features, I had the distinct impression they were studying me with the same intense curiosity I felt when looking at my own reflection. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a farewell, and I found myself raising my hand in response, the gesture feeling automatic and necessary rather than consciously chosen. We stood like that for a moment that stretched longer than moments should. Two figures separated by distance and glass, but connected by some recognition that transcended normal human interaction. Then they turned and continued walking, disappearing around the corner with footsteps that I continued to hear long after they had moved beyond the range of normal sound. I returned to the kitchen, where the French press waited with its burden of dry grounds, and the empty cup sat steaming in the sink. The notebook lay open to the page I had just filled, but the ink had faded to the same weathered appearance as the earlier entries, as if my fresh writing had aged weeks in the span of minutes. The words remained perfectly legible, but they now carried the weight of old secrets rather than immediate observations. The cabinet door stood slightly ajar, though I was certain I had closed it after removing the coffee grounds. Through the narrow opening, I could see the familiar arrangement of dishes and cups, but the shadows between them seemed deeper than the available light should have created. Something moved in that darkness, not dramatically, just a subtle shift that suggested presence without revealing form. I reached for the door handle, but my hand paused before making contact, held back by an instinct I couldn't identify, but felt compelled to obey. The morning ritual would begin again. I realized, not as a repetition, but as a continuation of something that had never truly ended. The coffee would be made and not made, drunk and not drunk. The cup would be empty and full. The notebook would record events as they happened and before they happened. I would move through these actions with hands that felt like mine and weren't mine, guided by intentions that arose from a consciousness that was becoming less familiar with each passing moment. I approached the sink, where the empty cup waited with its impossible warmth. My reflection wavered in its steaming surface, features distorting and clarifying in the rising vapor. The face looking back from the depths of the cup was mine, but it smiled with knowledge I hadn't yet acquired. Eyes bright with secrets I was still in the process of forgetting or remembering. I lifted the cup to my lips, tasting nothing and everything, drinking emptiness that filled me with someone else's satisfaction. The morning ritual began, as it always did. Equals. Story 10. The grain of the wood feels different under my fingers tonight. Rougher somehow, like it's been weathered by storms I never witnessed. I keep running my palm across the surface, searching for the smooth familiarity I remember, but finding only ridges that seem to spell out words I can't quite read. I must have been sitting here longer than I thought. The lamp's amber light has grown dimmer, or perhaps my eyes have simply grown tired of seeing the same things the same way. The dresser's shadow stretches across the floor now, reaching toward my feet like spilled ink. There's a sound coming from inside the drawers. Not quite scratching, not quite settling. More like breathing, if wood could breathe. I tell myself it's the house expanding, contracting, doing what old houses do. But my hand hovers over the top drawer's handle, trembling slightly. The scent is stronger now. Musty paper and something else. Something organic, like soil after rain, but wrong somehow. Too sweet, too alive. I opened the drawer. Inside, my clothes lay folded exactly as I left them, but they seemed smaller, as if they'd shrunk away from the edges. In the back corner, something glinted. A key I'd never seen before, tarnished brass with an ornate bow that matched the carvings on the dresser's face. The key was warm in my palm, warmer than it should have been after sitting in a closed drawer. I held it up to the light, watching shadows dance through its teeth, and noticed something carved into the metal. A single word, worn smooth by countless fingers. Remember. But remember what? I've been carrying the key with me now. In my pocket during meals, clutched in my fist while I sleep. The metal has grown familiar against my skin, like it belongs there, like it's always belonged there. Sometimes I catch myself rubbing it between my thumb and forefinger, feeling for that worn inscription. The dresser looks different each time I return to my room. Not obviously different, just wrong in ways I can't articulate. The wood grain shifts patterns. The handles seem to catch light from angles that shouldn't exist. And always, always, that breathing sound from within. I found another key today. This one was in my coat pocket, though I don't remember putting it there. Identical to the first, except the word carved into its surface reads, forget. The metal is cold, so cold it numbs my fingertips when I hold it too long. 2 keys now. Remember and forget. They click together in my pocket when I walk, a soft percussion that follows me through the house. The sound echoes strangely in empty rooms, as if the walls are listening, learning its rhythm. The dresser has more drawers than before. I'm certain of this now, though I can't explain how wood multiplies itself. I count them obsessively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But sometimes there are 6. Sometimes 7. The extras appear seamlessly, as if they've always been there, as if my memory is the thing that's wrong. Each new drawer contains another key. Forgive, regret, return. The words blur together in my mind, a litany of commands I don't understand, but feel compelled to follow. My pockets grow heavy with their weight. I tried to leave the keys in another room, but they find their way back. I wake with them pressed into my palms, leaving small indentations in my skin. The metal tastes of copper and earth when I accidentally brush them against my lips. The breathing from the dresser has grown louder, more urgent. It matches my own rhythm now, as if we're synchronized, as if we're sharing the same lungs. When I hold my breath, the sound continues, hollow and patient. I understand now that the dresser isn't just furniture. It's a mouth, and I've been feeding it my attention, my obsession, my sanity. The keys aren't keys at all, but teeth, and I've been polishing them with my touch, sharpening them for something I can't name. The drawers open themselves now. I watch from my bed as they slide out in sequence, revealing dark spaces that seem to extend far beyond the dresser's physical boundaries. Things move in those depths. Things that know my name, though I've never spoken it aloud. Remember, forget. Forgive, regret, return. The words circle in my head like water down a drain. I write them over and over in the margins of books, on scraps of paper, in the dust, on windowsills. My handwriting looks different each time, as if someone else is guiding the pen. I am the dresser now, or perhaps I always was. The distinction has become meaningless. My thoughts arrange themselves in drawers, sorted and cataloged by hands I can't see. The keys unlock nothing and everything, turning in locks that exist only in the space between sleeping and waking. The amber light flickers, goes out, returns. In the darkness between, I see myself from the outside, sitting before the dresser, fingers tracing patterns in wood that breathes with my breath, dreams with my dreams. The woman in the chair looks familiar, but I can't remember her name. The keys sing now, a chorus of metal voices spelling out truths I'm not ready to hear. But I listen anyway, because listening is all I have left, all I've ever had. The dresser smiles with my mouth. Equals equals equals.